From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
And good morning to you. Welcome to Sunday Edition. It's been a week since the Utah legislature wrapped up the 2023 general session, where lawmakers passed 575 bills, the largest number of bills passed here in the state of Utah since the legislature actually began tracking that data. Those bills now await Governor Spencer Cox's signature or his veto. During this year's session, Utah lawmakers passed a historic $29 billion budget, tackled major health care decisions for transgender youth and women, and approved a $400 million tax cut package, among other things. Utah's Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson joins us right now on the program to look back over the legislative session. And Lieutenant Governor, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Doug.
There are so many things that we want to talk about, and some I know are very personal to you, but perhaps you could share your overall impression of the session. And I've mentioned this several times in discussions that we've had around the state regarding the legislative session. It goes back at least 3 governors now where they have kind of looked at the legislators, and you have been one, and so has Governor Cox, and they have kind of pleaded with the legislature, please, you know, let's stick to the big stuff, the real important stuff, and message bills and so on. And every year it just seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. First of all, what about the number? You've been a legislator, you've been there, you know what it's like. How do we handle 1,100 plus bills to look at?
Well, I mean, there's only so much you can do in a 45-day legislative session, so that in and of itself is limiting. But still, every year it does seem like they pack more and more in. I think the last time there was even close to this number of bills, it was 574, and I believe I was in the legislature that year when that happened.
Right.
But I have to say, I think if there's an overall theme, yeah, there were some things definitely that were controversial that happened. There were things people really liked, things people didn't like. But I think overall it was a really historic session. We did some really big things, some really good things. And what's harder for people to realize is a lot of not great stuff didn't pass, or it significantly was changed before it did pass. So it's to see headlines in the middle of the session and not really understand how the water got down to the end of the row, and that maybe those bills didn't pass or maybe they got changed.
Right. I know I've heard some frustration that, wow, they passed unanimously, it did this and this, but it wasn't funded. And, you know, every legislator, of course, has their pet projects and things that they have to answer to their constituency for. As you anticipate, I heard Speaker Wilson the other day. It was at a gathering, a legislative session for the South Valley Chamber, and he talked about how fortunate, because many people are saying, well, with all of this and the $29 billion budget, do we want to change the legislative design to be longer or full-time or whatever? I'll tell you, the people that I trust and know that are in the know say, let's keep it the way it is. Utah is truly blessed to have this situation. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. The last thing we need is a full-time legislature. And I think pretty much every legislator in our legislative body would agree. Maybe there might be some who don't, but we have a very unique form here with our short legislative session, our part-time legislators who have to go back and work and live under the laws that they pass. And I think it's a good thing. Yes, they don't necessarily become experts in everything, but they do become subject matter experts in many things. And that's, I think, how it should be. It's a citizen legislature.
Let's talk about one of the, I mean, there are so many important things, as you have pointed out, that were before the legislature, but there's something about water and the Great Salt Lake and some 8 years of drought in the state of Utah. Some people were kind of openly musing, I wonder if it's helping us or hindering us that we're having such a great water year right now. It might have been better if we were still in drought years to really put some emphasis behind this. But as far as the water legislation, as far as the Great Salt Lake caring for that incredible asset and gift that is to Utah, did we do enough?
Well, I don't know if we ever can say we've done enough, but we've done a lot. And I have to give credit where credit is due. Of course, Governor Cox has been pushing the Great Salt Lake and making sure that we have better water policy and conservation efforts in place. But Speaker Wilson, Brad Wilson, has just done a monumental lift here. And his leadership has been critical in making sure that we're funding. We've spent over $1 billion, or around $1 billion, in the last 2 legislative sessions on water and focusing on the Great Salt Lake. This is historic. We're bringing attention to something that has lacked attention for a really long time. And yes, that long drought has helped us be able to change some of the water policy and get the political will among legislators and among the people of the state to be able to agree to make some of those changes. Is more necessary? Probably, even though we're having a great snow year.
Right.
But I think the legislature has had foresight here, at least in recent years, and I've got to give them credit there.
I really appreciated the use it or lose it legislation, because the concept, we've all complained about that at the national level. Well, if you have this budget, if you don't spend it, you won't get it next year. Well, with water law, you know, if it goes for a period of time and a water user did not use their allocation, they could and would lose it. I think that makes so much sense. And I'm assuming the governor will if he hasn't already signed that.
Oh, of course. I mean, we've always got to look at what government is incentivizing or not. And when it comes to water policy, we've been incentivizing the wrong behavior for a long time.
Let's talk about tax cuts. Nobody likes, you know, to pay taxes. I mean, we appreciate what they do and so on. But there's also an interesting thing on Capitol Hill this year. People were saying we want to give the money back to Utahns. And I get that, but at the same time, Utahns are saying, rather than give me a little bit back, I'd rather have it targeted and maybe go to education, although I know education fared very well. Just your thoughts, and where's the balance on that? Again, it was legislators who pointed out the last 3 years, there have been substantial tax cuts, and someone in the legislature, very prominent, alluded to the fact that 2024 could be another one of those years. What about that? The idea of getting a little back, but would it be better spent elsewhere?
Well, I tend to agree with legislators who think that maybe the people of the state of Utah know how to spend their money a little bit better than the government does. Now, that's not to say that there's not a proper role here for us, and there have been very important things like water and education that we're spending our money, transportation, public transit, things like that. But when you have a significant revenue surplus, I think it's fair to say, look, let's maybe lower our income tax rates. We've got other states in the surrounding area that have lower income taxes than we have. We want to stay competitive. One of the really cool things that we did this year for the first time was we provided a double exemption for the birth of a child. You know, if you have a baby on December 31st at 11:59 p.m. in 2022, you get a tax exemption for that child on your 2022 taxes. But if you have the baby 2 minutes later, you don't. And so we fixed that with this tax package, giving that double birth exemption. We want to be able to have people, have families, be able to keep more of their money so that they can do this, especially right now when there's high inflation.
Yeah. I mean, inflation had been as high as 8 and 9%. Now it's 5%, and boy, it's still that's a big hit, especially for growing families.
Exactly.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you for joining us, and you're going to stay with us one more segment because there's so much more we want to talk about with our Lieutenant Governor. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about education, because that's an important part, since I mentioned it with the tax cuts, but also some of the Medicaid expansion for postpartum, some of the abortion issues, and of course a domestic violence issue that is so important to you. So stay with us. We'll be back with Deidre Henderson here on Sunday Edition. We are continuing a great conversation with Utah's Lieutenant Governor, and Deidre Henderson, again, thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking back at the legislative session, and let's not shortchange education here. I want to make sure that I bring that up, because we talked about tax cuts and so on. We've talked about some adjustments in the state and so on, but education, it has fared fairly well over the last several years.
Absolutely. And I think, again, another theme this legislative session is believing in the and. We had historic tax cuts and historic education funding increases, almost 20% of new money in education, which I think is far and away the most that we've ever had. So we want to make sure that we can take care of our teachers, and we've been working deliberately on that. We're not there yet. We're not done. Right. But we've made big steps this year in making sure that our kids are well funded, that they have a good education.
The concept of melding different ideas that are affiliated together, kind of honestly forcing a vote. And for some people, tough. You know, we see this back in Washington all the time. There'll be a piece of legislation that everybody loves, and somebody will hang an ornament on that tree, and all of a sudden people go, okay, now this is really hard. Some people claim we did that with education this time, with vouchers or scholarships, and then with giving teachers a not insubstantial increase. Some people, I've heard from very prominent educators and others who have strong feelings that they felt like they had a bit of a gun to their head on this one.
Well, I can see why they might be frustrated with that. I also understand this part of the process. Nobody gets everything they want. There's give and take. And in order to get one thing here, you might have to give up another thing here. Not unusual. The difference between what we do here in the state of Utah and what happens in Congress is we do have single subject. Yes, there might be little ornaments, as you call them, and I've used that term too, stuck on the Christmas tree, so to speak. Yeah. But it's not as bad. I mean, seriously, not as bad as it is in Congress, where it doesn't have to have any relation at all to the bill at hand. Here in Utah, it does. And yeah, there was frustration there, but regardless, we've got an historic increase in education funding and a $6,000 a year increase for teachers.
Boy, that is a big deal.
It is.
For a teacher. My mom, I joke that I'm the only failure in the family. I'm the one that didn't become an educator. And I went into the whatever this is. My grandmother had a hard time even understanding what that was. Let's talk a bit about the postpartum Medicaid expansion, and maybe at the same time, because I want to spend some time for the domestic violence issue that I know is so important to you and hits way too close to home. But how did we fare on those? Are Utahns overall fairly satisfied with what happened?
Well, it's hard to say. If I believe they probably are, yes, because the legislature does reflect the people. That's the goal, right? And if that's not the case, then next year there's going to be an election and the people can correct course. But I think that, not everybody's going to be happy. But we are a family-friendly state. We are a pro-life state. We always have been. But sometimes we say pro-life, and it doesn't necessarily translate into family-friendly policies. And that's what I love about some of the big lifts that we had this legislative session. And that postpartum Medicaid expansion is one of them. Mm-hmm. And we say expansion, it's just mirroring what we already give to the child, right? When a woman is pregnant and she gets on Medicaid and has a baby, that baby has that Medicaid coverage for the first year of life. The mother, however, only has it for 60 days. It's a terrible time to try to re-up. Two months after a baby is born, try to do the paperwork and re-up. So we're extending that out to match the babies. And I think that's a really family-friendly policy. Let's
talk about the domestic violence. I saw your testimony before a committee, and it just touched me deeply. Tell us about the domestic violence discussions on the Hill and what ultimately happened. And perhaps, for those who may not know, your connection as well.
Certainly, thank you. Again, historic. We have a serious problem with domestic violence here in the state of Utah. Many women experience domestic violence and don't understand what the resources are or what the help that is that they can get. I have a cousin, Mandy Main, who last August was murdered by her ex-husband. And this came after years of threats and stalking. And in the 2 days leading up to her murder, she had interactions with him, and the police were called. And there were just different things happening in different jurisdictions, and the wires got crossed, and the communication wasn't there. And she didn't get the help that she needed. Yeah. So what this bill does that we worked on this legislative session is it requires law enforcement to ask a series of simple questions called lethality assessment. And depending on how the victim answers those questions, the officer knows that they're scored at a high risk of being killed and can connect them to victim services. So we did that. We provided a lot of funding for victim services. And then we also are creating a database for law enforcement throughout the state to know if this person, this offender, has had a past, they need to know that information at their fingertips so that they can make proper decisions. And so we've created a database so that law enforcement can, on the scene, have information at hand as to whether or not this person might be escalating or is a chronic offender.
Has this brought comfort to you and to others out there? I can only assume it did.
It did. I worked with my aunt and my uncle and my cousins. They went and toured the state with me and visited many law enforcement agencies and judges and prosecutors and victim service providers. And it has brought a lot of comfort. Mandy should not have been murdered. But her death has meant something, and we do believe that because of her, because of the work that the legislature has done now behind the scenes, that other people will be saved.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for making time for us on Sunday Edition. We wish you the very, very best.
Thanks, Doug.
Our Lieutenant Governor, and 2 segments on today's program. We have more to cover coming up. We're going to talk about One Kind Act a Day, the resolution that passed on Utah's Capitol Hill. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. During this year's legislative session, lawmakers presented a resolution promoting more kindness. It won the approval of the Utah lawmakers on Capitol Hill and has the backing of our governor, who last year declared a day in April, One Kind Act a Day. The resolution was inspired by Khosrow Semnani, an industrialist, community leader, and philanthropist whose foundation is sponsoring this initiative. And Khoz, I've known you for over 40 years now.
That's right.
And I've had the opportunity to see some of the things that the foundation and your various companies have done over the years. But this one caught me a little off guard. First time I ever heard about this initiative was during our Give-a-thon on KSL radio and television here last year. Tell us a little bit about this initiative and where it came from.
I'd be pleased to do that. It's good to see you again. Thank you for having me. Really, the genesis of this whole idea came about over a period of 40 years, like you say. I've lived in Utah, and I've been the beneficiary of many, many acts of kindness by Utahns and the friends, the co-workers, the professors, whatever you may call it. And somewhere around 2021, I actually started thinking about, we can't afford having all of this tension that is spilling over to our state of Utah. And the state of Utah is, what I know of it, is very kind, very service-oriented, very volunteering-oriented. And I said, we have to talk about that. We have to do something. We have to raise the issue, because Utah is better than that, to have all this dissension and tensions and so on that's going on, may it be political, may it be racial, whatever else that people are talking about. And so I said, okay, we step forward and we promote kindness. This is time to do that, because people of Utah, statistics shows that they have the highest volunteers per capita in the world, in the country, excuse me, in the country. So I said I can be a part of it. So that's what we started, and the campaign started. I called it One Kind Act a Day. It's simple. There's no boundaries. There's no limits. There's no lines or anything like that. It goes across religious affiliations. It goes across racial, political, everything. And people by nature are kind. That's my belief. We just have to remind them. Mm-hmm. And I think the whole idea of kindness, we can do it with a smile, we can do it with a phone call, we can do it many ways. We all know how to be kind. And that's how I started it. And it's doing very well, and I'm really pleased how it's been received in the community from University of Utah and others, businesses and so on, that have participated so far.
How did it rise to the level of a resolution on Utah's Capitol Hill that apparently legislators fully embraced? And what was in the resolution, and what will it bring about?
I think the idea of resolution, it was really something that back in 2021, when 22, excuse me, when the governor was involved, and he called April the 12th, the Day of Kindness, One Kind Act a Day. I said, I think we've got to do it every year, rather than just 1 year. Mm-hmm. So I talked to some of my friends, and over a period of time, I've earned, and I've had the luxury and honor of having many friends at the legislators. So I called one of them and I said, how do we do that? How do we go about making that happen, that goes forever, essentially? And so it's a basically concurrent resolution between the House, Senate, and the governor's office. And Senator Kurt Bramble decided to take that on. He's an old friend of mine, and he did that. And equally on the House side, the House member Stephanie Gracious picked that up, and is passed. I believe it passed unanimous, at least to the extent that I've learned. And I'm really appreciative to our leaders to support that. And we've got a great advisory board. We've got the religious leaders from every religion in the state supporting it. So,
as I mentioned, the first I became aware of this was last year, and it came with the knowledge came with a very generous donation that helped our effort, in that case, for Primary Children's Hospital. So does it equate dollar-wise? Is it along with being kinder and looking for kind things to do? Does the foundation fund certain things that help facilitate that?
The foundation funds it, yes. Ultimately, there would be an endowment that it would take it for years to come. But you're correct, yes. It is the foundation actually funds it. The money or donations and so on, we don't accept donations, but we encourage donations to the institution or a charity of your own choice.
Right.
We very much encourage that. Whoever wants to contribute to the charities, we promote that. Our job is really to promote and remind people that they should be kind. And you can talk to any individual. They all have their own reasons and why kindness is good. So no, the foundation supports that financially, and we provide signs, stickers, events, anything that we can remind people to be kind.
We unfortunately are out of time, but how can people get the information? Like if somebody wanted to sign or so on, is there a website? Where do they go?
Yes, it's called The Power of Kind, and they can go to that website. They can sign up, and as soon as they sign up, we can get their information. We can forward all kind of signs and banners or whatever else the business, if it's a business, we can even provide bigger banners and so on.
Wonderful.
And that's our job.
Khos, thank you so much.
Thank you
for being part of the program today.
Thank you, Doug.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of Sunday Edition. We hope you'll join us again next week, and music and the spoken word, that's coming up next.